taking a look at 5-1. Okay. All right. So why this chapter becomes difficult is because I'm choking on my own spit. Well, if it was someone else's spit, that'd be kind of awkward as well. So like, sir, if you're just weird. Okay. The reason why this chapter is so difficult is you need to have the understanding between population mean, standard deviation of an entire population, a sample mean, and a sample standard deviation. So a lot of times you're reading for content to know why certain things can take place. So let's start kind of this information. If I were to do a poll, let's say I had took all 31 students in this class, and I were to give every one of you a certain number, a certain 2-digit number, and then I randomly chose 5 people by using a random number generator, and then I made a conclusion based on those 5 people, and then I turned around and I applied it to the United States. Is that fair to do? No. So that is a huge extreme, big difference on this kind of stuff. So again, when we get 5-1 through 5-5, we're going to skip 5-2. But 5-1 to 5-5 with 5-2 skipped is not totally difficult. When we get into next week, we have to dig in. So I would request that when we're going through this chapter, that you keep your social media to a minimum during the teaching portions. Deal? I don't have a lot of requests. That's just a request I have. Okay, now I'm not going to sit there. I'm not that teacher who's going to take your phone away and you get to pick it up from your dean's office. I reserve that for my algebra 1s. Okay. So the first example on this page is talking about cholesterol. Okay. So let's skip down a little bit to the third paragraph. It says the challenge ahead is to study sampling distributions, how they help us to establish statistical evidence. Because we are attempting to draw an inference from our sample and generalize it to the population, this branch of statistics is often called inferential statistics. Now, if you pick, well, let me just tell you, when I got my master's degree, I got my master's degree in education administration and supervision. So I have my superintendent's license, I have my principal's license, and I have my teacher's license. So I can be a superintendent, okay? Of course, I'd have to apply for it and get a position. I could be a principal. I was actually an assistant principal for 3 months. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And the reason I hated it is I got to deal, 90% of my time, got to deal with the 5% of the bad population. Okay? So everything was bad news. Every day. It was like, this stinks. Now, some people are wired to do it. And some people, like me, are not. Like, I miss not being in front of kids. When I was a math science coach for the district, and I only had one math class here at Creek, I missed being able to engage with students. Okay? And that's when after 3 years being in the district, I went to Principal Silva and said, what? And I knew that we had 3 teachers in the math department here that were retiring. And I said, I want to be considered for one of the full-time positions. And it was like, great, would love to have you. So that's how I got in, which I loved. I proved myself with the medical class. I proved myself with my Algebra 1 class, or it was a college algebra class I taught. In fact, during the very first graduation of Cherry Creek High School I was part of, one of my students in my college algebra class had her speech in front of the parents and the graduating class about me. And it was because Mr. Stirrup did, and Mr. Stirrup did, and Mr. Stirrup did. Here's this brand spanking new teacher to the district and to the school who only teaches one class. A student could have talked about anything of successes or failures or challenges, and they chose to refer to me because I was a very inspirational part. So I thought that was kind of a good feather to have in my cap. So, but when I got my master's, I basically had to write a thesis. And my thesis total is 108 pages. There's 5 chapters. The first chapter talks about just block scheduling versus traditional scheduling. Introduces why block scheduling is used, introduces why traditional scheduling is used. It talked about a whole bunch of things of the 2 different types of scheduling types. And I had a disclaimer in there that some schools have a portion of their schedule is block while the other portion is traditional. So there's like hybrids of it. Second chapter said, this is what I want to find out. I want to find out if block scheduling has a positive effect on students' learning and how I will administer it. So then I created a pre-test, and I also created a post-test. Now, I was in Clark County School District, which at the time had 55 high schools. Okay, so a huge district. It was the 6th largest school district in the United States. So what I did is I did this. I took each high school that was in the district. So I numbered from 0-1 to 5-5. And the reason I did 0-1 is everything I needed to have a 2-number digits are 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, so on and so forth. And then I did a random sample and gained 10 high schools that I chose randomly. Some that had blocks, some that didn't, some that had a hybrid as well. And then each of those high schools that were now selected, I went through and I took a look at the math departments. And I gave every teacher at each of the high schools a 2-digit number as well. And I randomly selected 3 teachers from each high school to participate in this study. And I sent them an email to explain who I was, this is what I was trying to do. Now, does that guarantee that those teachers at any of those high schools would participate in this? No. No. So now I have to account for it. I had 55 high schools. I chose 10 at random. I chose 3 teachers from 3 math teachers from each of those high schools at random. And then the ones that chose to do it, so you're talking about basically 30 different teachers of 10 different high schools of the 55 high schools total, that I sent them, here's the pretest, and it was short. It was 10 questions, multiple choice. And then I sent them at the end of the year the same exact test. And then I was able to formulate a conclusion whether block scheduling offered a better learning environment for kids in math than kids that are on traditional. And I did not show any improved scores in math as far as the pre-test and post-test that I gave. But again, I also had some people who they gave the pre-test, but they didn't give the post-test. I had some that I was hoping they gave the pre-test and they just hadn't sent them back to me. but they did the post-test incentive factor. So then, that's all information I have to tell my reader of my paper that I was doing. But in my conclusion, the only thing that I found, the main difference between block scheduling and traditional scheduling, any ideas? Other than you're sitting in 3 or 4 class periods a day versus 5 or 8? Do what's that?
Did more people finish the test in the block schedule?
Nope.
Did more people show up?
No. Think bigger. Think the whole school as live. The only conclusion we can make is block scheduling creates a safer school environment because there's less unsupervised interaction of students between class periods. Because you have 4 class periods there, so you have before school, and you have after school, and then you have in between. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 unsupervised, being included before and after school, versus here, or a traditional school, which have 8 periods. You have more times that kids are leaving class and passing in between. So you have less unsupervised interaction between students. Now, I could say that is probably a positive for schools that have a different demographic. If you have a demographic that has a large gang population, that might be a good thing. If you have a school that doesn't have a large gang population, you probably don't have too much to worry about. Now, I'm not saying that bad things don't happen to good schools, but when I was teaching in Reno, I was at a pretty hardcore gang school. Okay, and I've told you this, that it was a school that had roughly 400 students per class, so freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, there's about 400. Our graduation would have roughly 100 kids. So we had 75% of our seniors that didn't graduate. Pretty crappy school. Every period, teachers were expected to be in the hallway. And if you were in the hallway and had to use the restroom as a teacher, you had to let the teachers that were also in the hallway know, hey, I have to use the restroom, so they could kind of watch over. We used to have fights 3 or 4 times a day in between classes. And I'm not talking about a kid saying, you're a jerk, no, you're a jerk. I'm talking full-on fist, throwing. It was rough. So in that situation, the block scheduling worked better because you had less unsupervised interaction between students than, say, how like this school would have, 8-period day. Okay? It sounds goofy, but that was my main finding. So if you ever want to be bored, I'm happy to have you read my thesis, 5 chapters, 108 pages. It's pretty dry, but as far as educators went, they loved it. So I had a pretty good sample size, but that was based on Las Vegas, where I was when I did my master's. That should not be something that I could apply to nationwide, but there were definitely some findings that it did find. Okay, so enough of the boring stuff. So the first thing to talk about is parameters. Okay. Parameters. They're numerical characteristics of an entire population. Most of the time, you cannot figure out parameters. Okay, there's one thing that the United States does every 10 years, and it's called a census. A census is you're trying to target 100% of your adult population and your households in order to determine how to allocate funding for schools and roads and bridges, things like that. Okay, and this also changes how many people you have in the House of Representatives. Okay, so the United States tries every 10 years to do a census. Okay, it's very unlikely that there will ever be a statistical study other than what the federal government tries to do every 10 years to get 100%. So it's really hard to always get your parameters. you can't necessarily apply something that's happening in this state to compare to what's going on into another state. Okay, does that make sense? It's also hard to compare what's going on in the United States to what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay? Now, we've all been part of this huge thing called COVID, and some of you have had it, some of you got the vaccine, some of you haven't gotten the vaccines. I'm not here to say you should, you shouldn't. In between, you make your best personal choices. Don't allow someone to influence you on a choice that you want to make. Okay, you do what's best for you. But a lot of times parameters are unknown because you don't have the whole population. Now, there are times a problem that we will see will say, hey, this is what the entire population's mean and median and mode and standard deviation would be. And then sometimes it'll say this is what our sample has. Okay? So parameters we can't always meet. Okay? And then it talks about statistics, and that's pretty obvious. Okay? These are numerical characteristics of a sample. They're measured and calculated directly from a sample. Okay? So this is coming from a sample. So if we wanted to compare this stat analysis class to all the stat analysis classes that take place in the state, we could do that. You all would be the sample. Okay? Now, that's kind of a bad thing to sample because, am I a good teacher or a bad teacher? Some of you think I'm good, some of you think I'm bad, some of you are like, whatever. I'm just here. Just give me my grade and let me move on. Which, that's reality. In inferential statistics, the goal is to use common characteristics of the sample to estimate the characteristics of the population. Okay, that's huge. So inferential statistics takes a sample of a population and estimates the entire population. Okay? So, y'all have been to Starbucks, or a lot of you have been to Starbucks at some point. Agree? Some of you have a habit of being at Starbucks. And some of you are like, yeah, if I'm there, maybe if I'm with my friends, maybe I'll get something. I understand. I agree with you. But for us to apply this class right here, you all sitting right here, to the entire nation with respect to Starbucks might be nationwide. But do you think there are schools in anywhere USA, and I'm talking some of the flyover parts of the country, meaning the stuff you're looking at the plane going, oh, look, they have circles of stuff, and they have squares, and they have circles and squares, and those are all crops that are growing. Sometimes you go to some of those little tiny small towns, USA, there's not a Starbucks. Agree? I don't know if you've ever driven through some of those towns. Now, I went back and forth this past semester quite a few times to Lincoln, Nebraska, because we had season tickets to Nebraska football. It was great to see a under 50% winning team play, but I got to see my daughter. But there are definitely some exits in Nebraska that there isn't a whole lot of anything there. You get off in Hershey, Nebraska, you got the boot barn, and you got a gas station. That's right off the exit. And next to the boot barn or next to the gas station is not a Starbucks. So, one of the jokes we used to do when we used to drive down to Mexico quite often when we were kids is we took a road outside of Chandler, Arizona. It was called Riggs Road, Riggs Road. Riggs Road was a dirt road that you could drive however fast you wanted down Riggs Road because no one was really watching Riggs Road. And you take Riggs Road all the way down to a place called Y, Arizona. And when I say Y, Arizona, the joke when you pull into Y is going, why in the heck would you want to live here? It was in the middle of the desert. It was as hot as you know what, anytime you went there. And they had a Dairy Queen. That was the only thing that they were known for. Okay? So then you took Y, Arizona, headed about 30 minutes south of that, and you cross the border on the Arizona side. It's a town called Lukeville, and you cross into a small town in Mexico. And then we would head another 45 minutes southwest to Puerto Penasco, which is basically the tip of the Sea of Cortez. Puerto Penasco is very close to where the Colorado River used to flow into the Sea of Cortez. Okay, there's definitely places that I did driven that even in today's day and age would not have had a Starbucks. So is it fair that I could say the habits of this class with Starbucks could be applied to any town USA?
No.
No. Okay, so you kind of have to keep that kind of thought process in mind. Just because we live in a population center, meaning we have a larger population, in the Denver metro area, and we will, one of these days, the Denver metro area will have suburbs that'll go all the way to Fort Collins, and it will go all the way to Colorado Springs, I would imagine. Okay, it is what it is. I'm not trying to say that it shouldn't be. I'm just saying that very much could happen. Okay, so talk about inferential statistics. And then you talk about a population mean. And when you have a population mean, you have this Greek letter mu. Okay? So anytime you see the Greek letter mu, it's talking about a mean, but it's talking about the entire population. Okay? So in your readings, it won't always say that we're surveying an entire population. It'll say mu is something, it's some sort of average. And that applies to an entire population. Okay? And then you have the population standard deviation. And the population standard deviation is this Greek letter. It looks like a 6 that kind of fell over. Okay? That's the lowercase sigma. Okay? I believe. My Greek is right. And then you have the sample mean. So the sample mean is given as X bar. And these are all things that would be really good for you to have on the note card during tests or quizzes, okay? And then the sample standard deviation. Oops, I didn't mean to push my button. Standard deviation. They use the lowercase s, okay? So those are all important things for you as you're going through these things in this chapter to make sure you have these mean something. Okay? The different letters are in for a reason. Before, we weren't really too worried about it. Okay? So the very bottom paragraph says, the question that permeates all statistical research is this: do we trust the sample to represent the population? That, again, is the big idea. Okay? Again, the Starbucks habits of Cherry Creek High School, or Mr. Stirrup's first period stat analysis class, is not something that we can apply to the entire senior population, seniors and high school population of the United States. Okay? It's not fair to do, but unfortunately, it's done very often, and it's done incorrectly. Okay? I'm just trying to make you a wiser learner than that. And you have all been subjected coming through school. There was a big, huge uproar many years ago that we need to teach this Common Core math curriculum because, and this used to be advertised on TV, because the United States fell 16th on a test that was given based on other industrialized nations. We fell 16th. Okay? And I used to sit there, and when this came out, and we had the sales reps from Pearson and other textbooks companies who would say, we have the entire Common Core curriculum written here, and I would raise my hand because I'm that guy. I'd be like, what tests are they basing this off? And their answer to me was, oh, there was a test. And I'm like, hang on, time out. What test? Oh, there was a test. No, could you show me the test? Could you tell me how it was given? No, we don't have that information, but there was a test. I'm like, okay, and this is like my 9th year into teaching when this all came out. I was like, okay, I have not missed any days of school, ever. What test was given? Because I didn't see anything ever come across to us to give to kids. And I never saw any literature saying it is what we're trying to test. Okay? The Common Core movement was, and I hate to say this, but it's true, it was for textbook companies to profit off of educating kids. It had nothing to do with it was good or bad or indifferent. I can tell you this school did not change a thing they were doing and continued to get higher ACT and SAT scores than any other school in Colorado. Okay? So it's a goofy thing, but it's really okay when people are spewing statistics at you. It's really okay to throw back and challenge. I want to know how you got this information. And basically the argument I was in with these reps of these companies that were trying to sell us textbooks was almost a nuh-uh, yeah-huh argument. They had no foundation to what they were trying to do. They just put a huge scare. They spent a lot of money on advertisements that were on TV, knowing they were hitting populations. They were getting people going, oh, I heard this. This is actually one of the reasons why so many charter schools have become a huge movement. Okay? And I always challenge charter schools. Okay? If you're part of a charter school, I'm not trying to say that you didn't get educated. I'm not saying that. But a lot of times I challenge the principal at the charter school in Littleton Public Schools. And I just basically said this, and it was in front of a school board meeting because they were trying to get more and more of these. And I just, charter schools in Littleton Public Schools. And I just said, is there a pretest to get into your school? Why, yes, there is. Do you accept kids that have an IEP or a 504, meaning special education services? No, we don't. Think about that. Some of you have IEPs, 504s. Okay? There are charter schools out there. Now, there are some charter schools now they've created saying, oh, if you have an IEP or a 504, we're going to take you. But when they first came out, they weren't taking kids that needed special education services. They said they don't have the staffing for it. But then they had no problem saying, hey, look, we had a pretest. We don't have any special education services that we offer, so those kids go to the neighborhood schools. Look how much better that we're doing than neighborhood schools. And it's like, well, you're cherry-picking kids to be part of your school. No, we're not. Yeah, you are. Because Cherry Creek High School, if you live within the feeder of this school district or of this school, you get to go to Cherry Creek High School, no matter what your intelligence level is. No matter if you have a special education services you need, whether it's all of that. But they did not want to listen to this. And this started raising some eyebrows and saying, wow, this guy really challenged who we were. And I have no problem doing that because there's a lot of times I have no problem calling bullshit on stuff. And I call it on it because, one, I do have an understanding of statistics, and that's where I want you to start realizing just because you see something doesn't mean it has to apply to all. And I'm not telling you not to do things because of what you've heard or seen. We all know that we can go find something on the internet that is going to support our ideas. No matter how goofy some ideas could be, I can assure you, you could find something on the internet that's going to support what you think. Okay? And I'm not saying what you think is wrong. I just want you to be aware that there are so many influencers out there. Okay, you are all influenced so often by your social media. Now, a lot of you are looking at social media because there's funny stuff on there. There's cute stuff on there. But then you get the adult population that's also jumping onto social media who doesn't realize it's really an entertainment piece, that they think it's the gospel truth. And that's really sad and it's really scary. Okay? It's hard to argue against negligence. Okay? All right, so I'm on the back side of the page. I'm almost done with the notes. Random sampling is important. Okay, random sampling is something that we've all taken you've all had somebody in class at some point in your school career, from kindergarten all the way up, that has given you some sort of survey. Agree? I don't know what the survey is. We've all had some sort of survey that you have been given saying, hey, take this survey real quick. That's just to collect data. But I can't make a conclusion based on that data because this survey did not go out to a random sample of a population. So when I go back and say, hey, when I did my master's thesis, of the 55 high schools, I chose 10 of those schools at random. Okay, were there schools that I had picked up that came out of my random thing that I looked at and saying, Western High School in Las Vegas, God, it's a really bad school. I don't know if I want to work with them. No, I have to include that. If that came up on my random sample, I have to include it. But a lot of times, we'll sit there and forget stuff. And here's the sad thing. Okay? Very often, there are groups, religions, ethnicity of peoples that are ignored. Oh crap, Sturb just went there. I did. The greatest class I ever took in college, and I would take this class again if I could, was Arizona history, because I went to school in Arizona. Arizona history taught through the eyes of the Chiricahua Apache Indians. That's Geronimo's tribe. It was fantastic. I gained so much understanding of, wait a minute, this is Arizona history taught through the eyes of a group that we chose as a nation to put on reservations. Think about that. And I'm not telling you that what you have ever learned is wrong. I'm telling you, broaden your spectrum of understanding, and you're going to start understanding people so much more. Okay? So random sampling is so vitally important. Random sampling isn't like, I'm going to pick you, I'm going to pick you, and I'm going to pick you. That's not random sampling. Okay? I didn't pick the people back there because they were too far away for me to reach. That's not random sampling. Random sampling is I give all of you a 2-digit number, and there are random number generators on the computer. There's random number generators on your phone. There are random number generated things that come in books. In old statistics books, if you flip to the very back pages, you had a list of random numbers. And it was an entire page filled with random numbers. Okay? So random number generator is a pretty cool thing. It does randomize things. But as you, the writer, or you, the thinker, or you, the person who's going to do this survey of some sort, random sampling is such an important thing for you to do. Because then there are tests later that we'll talk about that say, hey, we can say with 90% confidence, or 95% confidence, or 99.9% confidence that if we redid this survey, or redid this information in the exact same way, not changing anything, that our information would fall within these standard deviations again. Okay? Independence is the probability of an individual's response was unaffected by the conditions by which other selections were made. Okay? So let's go back to those surveys that were handed to you at some point in school. I remember a survey that came out about 4 or 5 years ago. It was here. And it was a student in a statistics class that wanted to know about drug use. I give this survey to a bunch of freshman kids. Okay, I know we were all freshmen at one point. You get the kid, you turn around and go, dude, put that you use cocaine. Yeah. And then the other kid, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, well, now people are being influenced because you got a kid being a kid. A kid making a choice. Okay? The sample size. You want to know if your sample size is actually large enough, and there are tests to make sure that your sample size is large enough, that you can try and apply this to an entire population. Okay? Would it be fair that I pick a random number, and let's say I assigned Scott Swan 08, and I did a random number generator, and 08 came up and say, okay, Scott, I want you to fill out this survey. Is it fair for me to apply what I learned from Scott's survey to everybody else in the nation? Scott, I think you're a great person, but do you think that would be fair? No. Scott has a different upbringing than somebody next to him. The person behind him has a different upbringing than Scott. Okay? There are so many different things. So we want to make sure that we go more than one, less than a census, which is the entire population, but what's large enough to say this is a viable amount. Okay, and there are tests that we'll talk about with that. And then we have an example here. It says, let's assume that cholesterol levels nationwide have a mean of 195. Okay, so right now they're saying that we have, oops, I don't want yellow highlighter. I don't want calligraphy. That we're saying that we have a mean of the entire population of 195. Now, again, I said this is sometimes, most of the time, impossible to get, but they're telling us that this is just made up. But they're also saying that we have a standard deviation of everybody of 25. But then they tell us later in this, they say that we, let's see, I just lost my information. Then we also have a sample mean of 192. And we have a sample standard deviation of 21. Now, some people might look at these numbers as they're given to us and say, well, those are pretty close, and those are pretty close, so it's acceptable. That's very dangerous, friends. Okay? Because how close is close enough, and how far is too far? I mean, having an entire population of 195 and a sample of our population being 192, it's only off by 3. 3 doesn't seem like a great amount of variability, but it is. Okay? If you look at the sample standard deviation versus the population standard deviation, they're off by 4. Okay? So you're broadening your spectrum. So again, I'm using these values, and these are all given in the notes. But then it says, let's read the rest of it. It says, a medical researcher collects data from a database of 2,000 patients at a local Denver hospital. Okay? From this group of patients, he calculates the cholesterol is 192 and 21, which we already have. Okay, so is there something that's a red flag for you if we're applying this to the entire United States or the entire world? Yeah, we looked at a Denver hospital and got data from a Denver hospital. Are different hospitals throughout the Denver area have a different population? Yeah, if you go down to Denver Health, you don't need insurance. You're getting a different population of people who are showing up. Now, it doesn't mean that the guy who's making, $5.6 million a year doesn't show up to Denver Hospital for a procedure. Okay? It just means that you have different populations of different hospitals of different categories. Okay? Primary goal, the researcher hopes that his sample is representative if the population, in other words, if his sample mean of 192 is reasonable with the population mean, again, we just took out of a Denver hospital. So really what this study should have done is you should have taken all of the hospitals throughout the entire, if you're basing it on the United States, in the United States, give each of those hospitals a random number, create a random number generated situation to pick a certain amount of hospitals, and then you select all the patients that they have. You say, okay, I want to do a random sample of 2,000 people from each of these. Well, real small hospitals might not have 2,000 people in their population. Then we look for signs that the sample does not represent the population at large. Is there any reason to suggest that his estimate shouldn't be trusted? In this case, yes. Although his sample size is quite large, it is all pulled from a database of one local hospital. That's a red flag. You don't want that. Okay? If the goal is to estimate nationwide mean cholesterol, he needs to randomly select people from the entire population of interest. So they go on. Okay, so did I do okay? And guys, this is the stuff that I love. I love this stuff because this is going to make you less popular. Hey, would you do me a favor? Would you give me an honest attempt of page 67, do 1 through 12? Would you try? Cool. Thanks, guys. You did great.